Good afternoon, everybody, from sunny Syracuse, New York. Welcome to the Art at Home lecture series, a collaboration between the Syracuse University Art Museum, the College of Visual and Performing Arts, and the Office of Alumni Engagement in New York City. My name is Andrew Saluti. I'm an assistant professor and the the program coordinator of museum studies here at Syracuse University in the School of Design. And it's truly my pleasure to be with you this afternoon on behalf of the SU Art Museum and VPA. Even though this is a virtual event, as an official Syracuse University program, I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of the Onondaga Nation, the firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous peoples whose ancestral land Syracuse University now stands. When I was the assistant director of SU Art, one of my favorite responsibilities was the annual MFA exhibition. And I ran that show for a little over a decade. In 2012, I had the pleasure of working with our guest speaker today. His work became the centerpiece of the exhibition that year, where he was awarded the Ginsberg Prize for Best in Show. Professor Jave Yoshimoto has since gone on to be an incredibly active artist. His resume includes well over 100 exhibitions and dozens of solo shows to his credit in New York, Chicago, Portland, Seattle, Tulsa, Fort Worth, Lincoln, Nebraska, and Omaha. Jave's research and practice has taken him all over the globe, and his work has received a letter of recognition from the United Nations, as well as being awarded the Joan Mitchell Foundation's Painters and Sculptors Grant in 2015. Yoshimoto is currently an assistant professor of art teaching foundations level courses, as well as being a very active artist and an avid axe thrower. It's my pleasure now to introduce you to Jave Yoshimoto.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to Andrea and both Emily. It's an honor, and to be honest, it's very exciting to be part of SU again after being away for so long. It's funny because I feel like I was just there yesterday. I remember all the things I used to do, and I remember every single brushstrokes and walking to campus and fighting the snow like everybody else. So yeah, it's an honor to be back. So I'm just going to start off with a slideshow of my presentation, and please ask me questions at the end. So here we go. I'm gonna share my screen, and yeah, show you what I got. All right, so as Andrew's already mentioned, my name is Jave Yoshimoto. I have a master's of art therapy from the School of Art Institute of Chicago, and I also have MFA from Syracuse University in 2012. I did my undergrad in Santa Barbara, California, and got my degree in BFA in 2004 in painting. And I did a lot of found objects and basically restoring objects to make paintings on top of these found objects. So I was working with narrative early on to try to talk about different topics that I was observing around me at the time. I had a conversation with a friend of mine back in undergrad, and over coffee, he told me that this one line, art making is an egocentric act, which really threw me off. And I asked him what that meant. And he said it was every kind of artwork is self-serving. And this is where I had a really hard time trying to digest that information. I'm like, wait, art making isn't selfish. Art making is more than that. So ever since that, he told me that line, I've been on this search of figuring out what is the purpose of art making beyond self-serving act. So after I graduated from undergrad, I went to Chicago to study art therapy at the School of Art Institute of Chicago, as I mentioned. But it was not an easy route because initially my mother passed away, and I was having a hard time trying to decipher what to do with my feelings, my internal conflict. So one day I came upon this bacon for breakfast, and brought me a lot of joy. And I knew I had to bring this back to my studio to start painting bunch of bacon. So I'm just going to go through some of these slides quickly, but the bacon series is basically me trying to find joy within my practice, to try to find equilibrium so I can get myself to a place where I feel like I can use art to be more healing, to be for me to be more in touch with my personal self again. But when I was done with my degree, I was working in the community with different community members. This is in Evanston, Illinois, which is just north of Chicago. I was working with people who are trying to learn the process of art making, how that could be a very safe and very healing act, but also a space for them to be able to open up about their feelings and communicate that without words, but with the gesture, the act of art making, and also by witnessing other people's practice of art making. So that in itself was a very rewarding experience. And obviously after I was done with the degree, I wanted to do more with my art making. So I went back to Syracuse for MFA. And while I was there, something I discovered in my boxes of moving stuff was my really old Godzilla toy I had since I was 3 years old, which is one on the right, this little hideous toy that seemed to always go with me wherever I go. So it was like kind of strangely annoying, but at the same time, also very fitting, because as a child, I used to watch Godzilla films on reruns on TV in Japan. And whenever Godzilla went, he gets attacked by the locals, be it the local humans or other monsters. And I thought he was like world. I thought he'd be like a great symbol for me to paint my journey in grad school and possibly beyond, to kind of talk about my experiences being in the middle of nowhere, or being in the middle of the country, or in this case, being the East Coast. But I didn't want to just have Godzilla be the end all. I needed other influences. I needed other inspirations for me to start putting a series together. So I was looking at works like the Hokusai works, the flat graphic colors, which is, I guess you could say, is a predecessors to current graphic artworks of Japan, be it anime or manga or whatever you want to call it. To some more contemporary artists like Banksy, and even some historical artists like Francisco Goya, who observed what has happened around him at the time that he lived in, and to capture a moment of history. So these were the kind of artists I was looking at to try to kind of capture some of the stuff that I wanted to make. So in grad school, I was making paintings like this, where I was trying to talk about my personal internal struggle or my interpersonal relationship issues. But then Godzilla became less and less important and became smaller and smaller in my paintings. And then I realized that I was more observer of the world. And this is the 2010, the Gulf War, the Gulf oil spill from BP oil company. And I remember just how incredibly beautiful the oil in the water was, but also incredibly destructive and sad to just observe. And then I would start playing with the other mediums. So I was playing with Adobe Illustrator. This is about 10 feet high by 20 feet wide in illustration, to kind of talk about, again, my personal relationship with certain things in my life. In this case, my love for shopping. I definitely am a big, and I'm ashamed to say this, I'm a big Black Friday fan. So it's every shopping opportunity is like a party to me. So this is like kind of like my shame, and admitting that I embrace the ideology of consumerism. But what was interesting about digital illustration is that I come to the question, like, what is an original? So I turned that digital illustration into this black and white illustration, and then experiment with laser cutting for the first time at SU, actually. So in this case, I spray painted a piece of wood black, and then I did like a reverse engraving where I did inverse engraving, where I did the whites as part as the ones that I want to engrave away, just kind of leaving the blacks exposed. So in this way, I was kind of paying homage to the Japanese wood block print aesthetics, and but also staying contemporary with the technology that's been present and available today. But shortly after that, and the earthquake of Japan happened on March 11, 2011. I was in my second year in the MFA program. And for me, it was quite shocking because the 9.0 magnitude earthquake hit the northeastern Japan, triggering a huge tsunami that washed away the towns, and which inspired me to work on this, my thesis project. Nicknamed The Scroll, the actual title is Baptism of Concrete Estuary. This is the actual installation shot in the SU gallery, and that's the desk that Andrew helped me build for my painting. It's gouache on paper, and it took me quite a long time to make and paint. So it just started out from right to left, and I basically put down pencils down, and I painted each color a little bit by little bit with tiny brushes. In certain areas that I needed to make some accurate renderings, I would do grid illustrations to try to capture some of the details. But this is basically my studio setup where I had 2 doors and some sawhorses, and I just brought the painting with me in the back of my van to wherever I can go. Here it was a Vermont Studio Center, but also started to work some of the work in SU, some of the work at the Art Students League of New York. And about 328 days later, I was able to complete this project that is, again, 30 feet long by about 4 feet tall. Here are the detail shots. The 9 rings on the top right represent the magnitude of the earthquake. The whirlpool representing the place where all the boats and houses and cars were getting washed to the bottom of the ocean. Here you can see USS Abraham Lincoln, who was first on site to drop off supplies. The tsunami coming on land, the mudslide being triggered on land as well, houses collapsing, the explosion nuclear facility in the Fukushima Daiichi facility, roads collapsing. Oh, I'm sorry. As well as like the oil refinery. Here's where I thought was a key image where the mother and the child, was very heartbreaking for me to see. And I just thought it was important to capture the idea of loss because a lot of people lost something that day. To this day, 300,000 people are still homeless. 20,000 people went missing that day. And in this final slide here with the scroll, you see all the volunteers coming to town to try to rebuild for the future. So after I was completed with this painting, I wanted to be more than just the painting I exhibit. So I went to the local Syracuse Blueprint Company, I believe is what it's called. And with their help, I was able to scan this large painting in. It took us about 3 hours, 20 tries, and by finally we got it scanned in. And we were able to make these reproductions, and I was cutting this in the printmaking, thanks Dusty. And I was able to sell every one of these prints and then donate every penny of this proceeds to a nonprofit in Japan, where it went to an arts class that was helping kids recover from the trauma of the tsunami. At first, the kids were just drawing black circles on their paper, but eventually the smiles returned to their faces. They were able to work and draw with colors after a while. So it's nice to be able to contribute to something greater than myself or greater than my painting. So that was very touching for me. Afterwards, I went to visit Ground Zero, where the tsunami hit. This is basically what you'll see as far as the eyes can see, just foundations of houses. There's nothing left. Everything's just washed away. People had to escape to this local nearby elementary school and escape to the rooftop and watch their houses just get washed away into the ocean. It's really heartbreaking for me to see. And there's just piles and piles of rusted rubble that was like about 3 stories high. And there's just no place for these things to go. Right. So it was really heartbreaking, but yeah, it was something for me to really witness. I was at tears just standing there on Ground Zero. But anyway, that triggered my new series of painting at that point, which is the disaster series, just observing different disasters around the world. But initially started out more of a compact version of my scroll painting. So it has the same elements, the 9 rings, the mother and daughter, the tsunami, the Fukushima Daiichi plant, the exploding in the background, volunteers rebuilding in the background. So again, making homage to the aesthetics of Japanese wood block prints because of my cultural heritage, but also more of a contemporary style of painting because I also work heavily with graphic design. So very crisp and bright colors to kind of talk about not just the content, but also the emotions behind the paintings themselves. And then the subject kept shifting as here are the debris from Japan, where does it end up? Well, they ended up on the other side of the ocean, in this case, Pacific Northwest, where you have a motorcycle that washed up in Portland, you have a boat that washed up now near Vancouver, and all these other debris that was starting to just show up in the Pacific Northwest, Seattle, Vancouver. And the soccer ball in the bottom right you see in the picture is actually interesting because it has the owner, the kid's name and address on it. So the Vancouver couple who found the soccer ball was able to return the ball back to the original owner in Japan. So it was a nice full circle story. So it was like a really, I don't want to say fun. It was a very touching thing for me to paint. And then I started making other topics around the world. In this case, it was 2013 when U.S. was considering attacking Syrian government who was using biological weapons against its citizens. So this is more like a war games kind of a commentary piece here. And looking at other man-made disasters. In this case, this is about the Faroe Islands, where there's an annual tradition where every year the islanders would trap these pilot whales in the bay, and then they get butchered on the beach by hand. Historically, these pilot whales were used by the islanders for fuel, for food. So now it's become more like a annual tradition, kind of like similar to 4th of July is for us in the U.S. And what was interesting about the process up until that point was that I was relying on other people's stories. I was relying on other people's news to make a composition, which in a way I feel was not quite enough. So in 2015, when I received my Joe Mitchell grant, I proposed that I would do my own research. I would travel to different places around the world to make a series of work based on what I discovered. So I went to two different countries, and I'll try to go through these slides fast. First place I went to is Nepal, where I believe like a 7.0 magnitude earthquake hit the country, causing a lot of rubble, people being buried alive, and then they were stranded in the monsoon season. So it was a very difficult time for millions of people there. The buildings are not designed for earthquakes, so it was collapsing everywhere. This is the village of Langtang. This is the most heartbreaking story I heard. There was a village of about 300 people. This is before the earthquake, and this is after the earthquake. The village was survived by one man who just happened to be out on a walk to buy some groceries for his wife. He had about $7 worth of money in his pocket, and he had nowhere to return to after that. So here are my own images. This is me visiting Kathmandu and other towns, just observing what was happening. Here are people just picking up their own houses brick by brick to try to rebuild their houses with their neighbors, with their friends, with their family members. And I met other locals to kind of see what was happening. The one we just saw was someone that was working with an American nonprofit who was visiting these mountain villages that have no roads and no access with cars and motorcycles, just on foot. And you can see how the houses are built here. And this is not earthquake proof whatsoever. So the American volunteer architects helped design this design where you can use the existing material there to create this design where the building can actually sway with more earthquake resistant. So we were visiting and checking out these things, and they didn't just build it for them. They actually taught them how to build, so they can be more self-sufficient in creating buildings that are earthquake resistant. So that was pretty cool to see and visit while I was in Nepal. And I also wanted to research about the Syrian refugee crisis at the time. Much like everybody else, I saw the picture of the boy on the beachside that drowned. And I was researching this and how the conflict in the country caused a mass people to just leave the country. This is a stat from 2015, so I apologize for the old statistic. Back then, 3.8 million people was displaced. And these are the routes that people are going through. And I'm only gonna focus on the route north through Turkey, through Lesbos Island in Greece, because that's the place that I went to visit. So this arrow here between Turkey and Lesbos, that's about 11 miles long. It doesn't sound like much, but when you have a really unpredictable water situation in the Aegean Sea, and where you have dinghies that can only made to host maybe 20 people max, is having 100 people, it's going to sink. A lot of boats have sunk over the years. And even if they're lucky enough to make it past the waters and land on the island, they're facing a very rocky situation. There's no real safe landing spot. Sometimes you get stranded. Sometimes you still can get washed away because the water is just that unpredictable. So a lot of people will discard what they have and then just try to walk from where they land to the city of Mytilene, which you see in the bottom right in the red. Most people land on the northern side of the island. And from the top of the island to onto the red city of Mytilene, it's about 14 miles on foot. And we're talking about mountains here, and it's very hard to walk those paths. And even if they get there, there's no shelter for anybody to go to. So people are just sleeping wherever they can, on railroad tracks, on the side of the road, whatever tent they can find, and in hopes that they can get registered as a refugee onto a camp and eventually hop on a boat to get to Athens and to be able to go into Europe to seek asylum. So again, 2015 statistic, it was the worst humanitarian crisis in the world at the time. 12 million people were displaced, which is more than Haitian earthquake, Hurricane Katrina, and Indian Ocean tsunami combined. These are my pictures. This is when I visited the village of, oh goodness, I'm sorry, my mind's drawing a blank at the moment. I'll come back to that. But this is a fisherman's town. It's a village of about 300 people. And this is where a site of some of the people on the refugees land. And I was on lookout duty. I was working with Lighthouse Relief, which is a Swedish nonprofit organization. And I was doing a lot of different things, be it night watch to make sure nobody's like on the boat in the middle of the night, to actually helping with the landing of the boats themselves. What I didn't realize at the time was that it's not just Syrian refugees. There are refugees from all over the world. There's a lot of refugees from Africa that I didn't know that were seeking refuge. I didn't know that there were refugees from Iran, Iraq, and other places. So it's a huge mix of people that I did not expect. I was also on kitchen duty. We're making a large pot of soup here and a hot meal to serve to the refugees. This is now a landing image. My wife is in the picture there. And we are just trying to get some emergency blankets on the bodies. This is the middle island where all the life jackets gets discarded, like hundreds and thousands. And it's like really high mountain of refugee jackets. Some nonprofits on the island decided to use some of these materials to make souvenirs for tourists and volunteers. But what's interesting about that is it's also a training program for refugees to learn English, to learn Greek, and also job skills in exchange for making these things. They're also given bus passes, and they have some normalcy into life. Under Greek law, they're not allowed to find a job. They're not allowed to go to school. So these are what they have to look forward to because they're not allowed to do anything else. So when I returned, I started making a series of paintings. Here I have frames of Instagram back then, because I was criticizing myself how I looked at the world through the lens of social media, through the lens of news media, through the lens of computer, that my viewpoint is limited. And I was also trying to find a way to make pieces that honor the lost lives in the Aegean Sea, but also paying homage to local Greek mythology, local Greek art, in this case, the pediment of the Greek architecture. The orange you see here is the actual life jacket one the refugees wore that I brought back and used as a material. Also, using the local stories to create the composition where they have this mythology of the Virgin Mermaid who helps sailors cross the sea to safety. She has a trident in hand. She holds the boat in the other hand. So I reimagine the Virgin as a refugee woman carrying other refugees in the dinghy and having them cross safely to safety onto the island. And this is, again, another piece that's on a similar idea. In the background, you see the conflict that's caused by some of the Syrian conflict, but also Russian planes bombing in the background, the discussion that's happening between Vladimir Putin and Assad. Excuse me. Making reference to iconography. There's a lot of icons in the local art. So the Byzantine art. So you have the mother and the child making reference to the Virgin and Jesus. Local Greek mythology with the goddess Eos on the right, helping them come across the land, and some of the local architecture, and just paying homage again to art history, but also in a more contemporary context. But shortly after this, I actually injured my arm. I could not pick up a paintbrush anymore. So I had to change my style of working. And this is where my old experiment laser cutting came in. I had access to a local makerspace where I was able to use a laser machine and basically use digital drawing as a base to create different layers and different pieces, and turn my paintings and my old printmaking stuff into more of a layered relief sculpture. Much more like a physicality of a physical space. And after I got used to the process, I was able to visit different campuses around the country, in this case UNLV, to create some the pieces into more larger pieces. So, but also visit, again, other campuses, and basically turning my paintings into illustrations and working with some of the students to say, hey, this is my process, this is how I do it. Do you guys want to try to learn how to do this? So in a collaboration, the students over there designed this frame for this piece for me. And we were able to build the pieces together, which I thought was like a really nice collaborative effort to create more like this joined relief project. But yeah, at first it came out as just a reproduction of my existing paintings, my screen prints, but eventually I would come and build my own design without having to reference my previous works. And this is one of those newer original pieces where I was using my experience and my own photographs to make a collage of one of the refugees cooking a dinner, the local Orthodox priest playing music for us while hanging out with the cat, and the volunteers in the background just being tired from all the work that we had to do in the tent. Making pieces about the local stories, like one of the refugees told me that he had to pay 50 euros for basically a lifesaver, which is about 55 bucks for basically a donut, right? And 100 euros, $110 to buy a life jacket, which could be counterfeit, and not even, and you may not even float in this life jacket. And 1,000 euros for a ticket on the dinghy to cross the water. So you're paying a lot of money to risk your life to cross the water. So if you can understand desperation and where they're coming from to pay so much outlandish money to human traffickers, you know that they're coming and trying to leave a really terrible situation. So the laser cutting pieces, I'm still composing it like I am with my paintings, just basically a collage of different ideas to try to talk about interactivity, technology, the gaze of us, the outside world, into their personal lives, and how we can get involved with their life. This is a piece about Nepal, the earthquake. The village of Langtang is up top. The earthquake is happening in the center of the piece. And at the bottom is the Indian border, where they close off the borders and they could not get the supplies in, be it water or fuel. So it's quite a bit of a political mess, even as the people needed help. We're kind of sound familiar to what's happening today, right? And then I started traveling around the country in my car, and I was just looking at different things that I would see. In this case, I drove by Powell, Wyoming, where it was the site of a former Japanese internment camp. So I made a piece about that, and I made a piece about racism that used to exist in this country, and that refers to these Japanese Americans being deserving to be in internment camp and whatnot. And I also met a couple in Colorado whose aunt was in the internment camp. So here's a picture of her enjoying a slice of watermelon in the internment camp that she was at. And you could see in the background that people are trying to have some kind of a normalcy, playing basketball while a soldier watches guard. So yeah, just a lot of historical references about where we are in the country, where we were and where we are, I suppose. This is a story from, I think, a year or 2 years ago, where a 3-year was at trial for being an illegal citizen crossing the border. But you could understand the ridiculousness of how a 3-year should not have to stand trial, right? She didn't speak English. And it was just one of the most weirdest things that's been happening in this country. Um, Here's a piece about a refugee that finally made it across to Europe to find some kind of a new future for his life. Here is a piece about people who are stuck in the war zones, living in destruction, but trying to find normalcy in that life. And then I started working more colors back in because I could paint again. So this is more a mixed media piece where I went to New Orleans. I was at the Joe Mitchell Center for residency last summer, and I read about how there's lead content in the dirt and how it's affecting children. So I had this broken banjo with the local lead contaminated soil inside the banjo, with the child engraving on the face of the banjo, basically lying, kind of talking about the toxicity of how this beautiful backdrop, but yet it's actually quite dangerous to be in. This is a piece about Tulsa and the opioid crisis that's been happening in Oklahoma and pretty much around the country, about how addiction can really affect the loved ones and how that makes people neglect the things that are important to them. Um, this is the piece again about the whole the conflict and how people live in the war zone areas, but in more of a camera format. In Nebraska, 2 winters ago, we had that huge freeze the polar vortex that affected our state. And came spring, it all melted and triggered this huge flooding all around the state. We lost about 60 to 70% of our crops and cattle. And it was just devastating. So this is just me talking about the destruction that happened within the state of Nebraska, the state I'm currently living in. And again, observation about what's happening. In this case, I'm making a commentary about the border crisis, where even children are treated like an illegal immigrant. Well, they are an illegal immigrant, but they are treated very badly. So you can see the stars in this flag here are replaced with the camps. That's which is the very standard and quite a few around Texas area. This is a piece, again, I made about the refugee crisis. In this case, I made it through a phone. And I used the life jacket, the leftovers again here to kind of represent almost like a blood flowing down the bottom of the phone. I used the phone because it is something that we peer through the world at, but also at the same time, it is a tool that we can choose to answer or ignore this call for help. And I just want to show you, these are the last few slides. My most recent projects I'm working on since the quarantine started. So also kind of to talk about how my design process works too. So I would create images or find source image to make images out of, and basically set the stage. I have the main characters, and I have the backdrop, and I have props to kind of set the tone and the space and the storyline, and then basically ended with a frame. So this is the piece I cut this week. This is not glued yet. This is not painted yet. It's just pieces just stacked on top of each other at the moment. But to talk in this piece just really talks about how we're isolated. But at the same time, the isolation is also dangerous because it is also a place of potential domestic violence. And then there's also a piece I made about initially how hard it was for us to go grocery shopping, especially for the elderly, where we can't find any toilet paper. And some materials are just scarce, yet we are enjoying Tiger King on Netflix, as you can see on top left. So a lot of references about what we observe, how I observe things, and how I turn them into more like a sculptural piece with my process. And also how hard the healthcare workers are working in a very much of a virus environment where it's just kind of spreading all around us, like in the vine that you see on the walls here. So Yeah, that's basically all my works and my current status. And I just want to end my talk with, so what does it mean to be a practicing artist? And this is just an advice for any young artist, be undergrad, grad students or whatever. And this might be kind of obvious, but please bear with me here. So first thing, create a digital archive of all the works, have an artist statement, resume, and CV, biography and statement, obviously very important. Have an elevated speech ready to explain the works. Learn to write about works that are constantly evolving because your work is always changing, right? Create and maintain a website, social media page. Again, obviously, you should be doing this already. Support fellow artists and promote them. It comes back full circle. It's very much a social circle, right? So don't be a jerk. Establish work regionally and nationally through artist calls. Save receipts for all art-related expenses for tax purposes. You can write off a lot of things, so don't get rid of those receipts. Have an art hero, both dead and alive, to look up to. Learn to properly pack and protect your works because don't trust UPS to take care of your stuff. I've had stuff broken before. Again, don't be a jerk. Nobody likes, I'm leaving out the expletives, but nobody likes a jerk. Have an attitude of gratitude. If you're grateful for opportunity, then it's just gonna be a little bit more sweeter anytime you get an opportunity. Choose a topic of passion and follow through. Practice mindfulness and self-awareness. The more you're aware of yourself, how you're feeling, how you're responding to things, the more it just feeds your creative process. So my conclusion, based on that conversation I had earlier with my friend about that egocentric act, is that art making is an egocentric act, as it is difficult, if not impossible, to create something that does not involve the self, because you can never remove yourself. However, it can be a catalyst for serving the larger picture and the greater good, a tool for introspection, self-awareness, and connection with other people. Art making is an opportunity to start a dialogue and conversation on things that are poignant in contemporary times and today's world. So that's my talk. Anybody have any questions?
There are a few questions that are pop. Can you hear me, Jave?
Yes.
Great. There are a few questions that are popping up in the chat, but I just have a couple that I'd like to ask first, if that's okay.
Sure.
And that sentiment that you're ending with, in terms of the not being able to separate yourself from your work, that's a great place to start, because I want to talk about Godzilla. Godzilla and legacy, right? So yesterday we had a nice chat, and we were talking about artists that came before, like fellow SU alum Roger Shimomura, and contemporary artists like Enrique Shigoya, appropriating cultural and pop cultural imagery to create statements about that outsider's view of American experience. And but what you're doing is slightly different. You're appropriating that ukiyo-e style, as well as the Godzilla figure as a surrogate for yourself. But as it evolved throughout your work, it's almost as if Godzilla is no longer the threat. Godzilla is just kind of watching. He's the creature watching, or the outsider watching the disaster that's happening in front of him. Is Godzilla gone from your work now? Is he going to come back? Is it something that you have kind of settled on and are ready to move on, or where is the Godzilla surrogate now with your work?
Well, Godzilla's still in there. It's just much more subtle. Not as important a forefront anymore. So in the nurse or the medical workers piece I showed, the Godzilla is actually hiding within the vines. So it's really subtle and very hard to see. It's not that important for me to show it. But yeah, I'm partially stubborn about it, because I don't want it to leave from my series.
Right.
Because of a conversation I had with one of the faculty back at SU. And it's funny, because after I made my 5th Godzilla painting, he said, well, you kind of beat it to the ground already, didn't you? I mean, there's no point in bringing any more Godzilla. What more can you do with it? So I haven't stopped using Godzilla since, basically. But yeah, it became just a symbol for me. It's basically one of my signatures that I incorporate. I have three basic signatures. One is my name stamp. One is Godzilla. The other is the sequence of numbers, which is latitude, longitude, date, and time I was born, and my favorite number. All three are always in my pieces, so just have to find them.
Well, and to follow up there, I mean, what I think is very smart with Godzilla is the fact that you're using it as the outsider, as something that is generally feared as soon as you see it, which is a great analogy for, you know, the immigrant experience. And I don't know how much that plays into your work and the concept of that. You do have, you know, you have a very American, you have a view of America that many don't have, right?
Right.
And to me, using Godzilla for that kind of analogy just seems like it seems like you could never put him away. I mean, it's something that will always resonate, right?
Yeah, Godzilla's like this thing that sticks out like a sore thumb. You can't not see him, right? It's kind of like where I am in the middle of nowhere, America, where I'm always noticed, like, oh, who's that guy, kind of thing. And whether they mean to or not, sometimes I am a victim of a stereotype or racism. Sometimes it's an accidental racism. People are nice about it, but then like, you know, that's kind of racist to say, right? So stuff like, hey, you remind me of that guy from the Asian cooking show. I'm like, okay, whatever. So yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not something that would, like, you know, scar me for the rest of my life, but at the same time, like, these things happen. So Godzilla became this, like you said, a surrogate for my experience in America. I just stick out, and whether I like it or not, I get attacked in ways that people mean to or not.
But then to me, again, what's most interesting about the evolution, and I'm
Mhm.
so glad you ignored, and I probably know which faculty member it was, but I'm so glad you ignored that advice, because the evolution of Godzilla, that he's just started gradually moving further back into the background, even though he's Godzilla. To me, it's a very strong concept.
Yeah.
So the other question that I always like to ask, and people who know me on the, you know, watching this are inevitably going to ask when I'm going to talk about process, because I love process and I love technique, and we've had a lot of conversations about printmaking. The evolution that you've had from painting to sculpture to these laser cuts, which, you know, as you said, was at first forced, but now it's become kind of it's become one of the main vehicles that you use. How do you feel that those objects, which are, you know, still two-dimensional but three-dimensional at the same time, how do they work differently? How do they speak differently? How do they engage the viewer differently from the, you know, the gouache on paper?
Yeah, with the paintings, they're much more fragile. They're much more, I guess, precious, because, you know, I had to put them in the frame or whatever. And with the laser cuts, yeah, they're fragile too, but seeing that there's this physicality that just never existed in my work before. And that's something kind of like really nice to have. It's kind of a sculptural object, but yeah, it's more kind of like a 2.5D relief print, right? So
2.5D, I
um,
like that.
yeah, and it's something I can still work with because it's in a compositional format that I can understand. I mean, I envy any sculptors because I have a hard time thinking in 3D most of the time, and I also envy printmakers because they can think in layers that I have a hard time doing sometimes. So I guess it's me trying to kind of pay honor to those guys who got those amazing processes, but at the same time trying something new and evolving as I have to. And you know, when during this COVID times, I had no access to laser cutters, so that made it really hard for me to make anything. So I was sitting on these drawings for months and like, well, when do I get to make these things? The answer was this week, which is great, but I may lose those opportunities again. Who knows? So with that in mind, I may have to transition to a different type of process again. See if I can my process can evolve to something else. So yeah.
See, but that's the thought process that really gets me excited about seeing the artist at work. Is that, I mean, you don't, even though you're doing these drawings digitally and you already have this, you know, what in essence a matrix, you know, set for the work. In your mind, that's not the finished product, right? That is a delivery method. That is part of the process to get to this other thing. And right now, that other thing, especially, you know, in concert with, now you've joined the found objects, the banjos, with the laser cutting, with the painting, like with all of these things coming together now. It's kind of exciting to see the work, to see where it's headed.
Yeah, thanks.
And I hope that you do have access to a laser cutter. I hope we all have the access that we need.
Right.
I have more questions, but I know that there are questions popping up in the chat. Emily, do we want to start to look at some of those?
Sure. Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So we do have one question about your work being very powerful and moving, and addresses a lot of very important yet difficult content. How do you take care of yourself emotionally when you make your art?
That's a great question.
That's the thing. When I'm making work on a heavy topic, I'm completely invested. So if I need to take care of myself, I have to do it outside of work. So these days, it might be just throwing axes at the hardwood targets, or just doing something that's completely opposite of what my brain is doing at the time. So maybe I'll binge watch Netflix or play video games or something to just get my mind off of the topic, because it does have a toll on me after a while. Like when I painted the scroll, it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to deal with. I could not make art for 3 months. So just really depends on the topic I'm trying to work on. I tried to start a piece about the George Floyd Black Lives Matter movement, but I couldn't finish. I got started, but I just couldn't go on because it's just such a really heartbreaking, heavy topic. So sometimes I fail, and that's okay. I just have to do what I can, I guess.
That is such a great question for what's happening right now, especially right now. Beyond the pandemic, there is a lot of crisis. I mean, there's a lot to tap into. For somebody whose work is really kind of a social conscious in what's a very news bite, quick, quickly digestible and then forgotten cycle. And then how you navigate that, how you decide to place focus when there is no focus. That's got to be very challenging. So in the case of Black Lives Matter, is that something that you're just putting aside and hoping to revisit? Is that something where you just need to say, no, that's not going to work? Or
well, here's the hard part. I mean, it's hard to touch because of the fact that it's a very specific movement that affects a very specific group of people, right? I'm a person of color, but I'm not black, and for me to make a piece about that, I wonder if it's my place. So that's one of the reluctance as to why. If a white person made a piece about Black Lives Matter, I think it's going to be a huge pushback, right? So I am trying to be sensitive of how in the delivery of the content as well, because not every piece. I mean, I have my thoughts and my feelings about it, and I'm sure it has its own value, but at the same time, maybe it's not as important as one that's coming from the actual group of people that's affected, if that makes sense. So, to say, another, like maybe a different group of people made other stuff about the Japanese American internment art. I mean, is that as genuine? I don't know. Maybe not. I'm not sure. Is it genuine for me to make that? I don't know. I never lived that time, right? So these are questions I have to ask too before I make something. Just because I started something doesn't mean it is my place to continue making it. So it's a tough place. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and that's basically, I mean, that's exactly the sentiment of my question, is that it's, how do you focus? How do you decide right now? And
right.
Anyway, I have no answer.
Yeah.
So, considering how many alums we have on this call, and this is an alumni engagement event. I myself an alumni as well. Emily is. I'm curious about your time here in Syracuse and what that, coming from the West Coast to the East Coast, did that have a discernible impact on your approach and the way that you saw, how your work was?
Yeah, I think culture of Syracuse itself was something I had to get used to. I came from Chicago at that time. I was more used to diversity, and then there was a much more, I'm trying to say it wasn't open. It was a little bit more closed-minded than it was in Chicago. But also everything was much more close quarters for me in Syracuse, right? So, I was within 2 miles on campus. The commute wasn't very much except to and from the campus. I was making art all the time. So I wasn't getting out. I wasn't getting involved in the community as much. So that was a difficult thing to navigate, as well as like the huge piles of snow. It's also different from Chicago. They have snow, but not the Syracuse kind of snow, right? But yeah, I mean, the draw was that, we had access to New York City. but that being far away from such a nice city and there's kind of feeling isolated in Syracuse was a different, very different experience. It's not to say that it was bad. I definitely enjoyed my time there. There's definitely ups and downs to every experience we had, right? But I think the people I met, the opportunity that I had, and the opportunity to make the scroll in Syracuse was fantastic. I can never take that back, and I would do it again if I had the opportunity. So, if anything, I think yes, it's a cultural shift I had to get used to. But then that's true for any grad student going into SU. But you know, we had to make the best of what we had while we were there, and I think I did.
I think you did too.
Thanks.
Emily, more chat?
Yeah, we have a couple more questions. Maybe following up on this, it's kind of related to your time at Syracuse and being an alumni. What was your favorite thing about being a student at Syracuse University? What did you enjoy the most, I guess, or a place maybe even?
Well, I mean, I think the camaraderie between some of my colleagues and I, the fellow grad students, even some of the undergrads, I was able to have some really nice, genuine conversations. I mean, the SU sports was also something that I certainly loved and enjoyed. I definitely took every opportunity to attend basketball games or football games or whatever, but it's just the idea of community, I think, that really helped me through my mind there. Some of the faculty has been very supportive and also challenging, which I needed. So I think that was a necessary part of my growth. So yeah, just being there, being around people and learning to grow was my biggest thing for me.
I think we have time maybe for one more question. Andrew, unless you have one that you still
Nope,
want
go right ahead.
We have a question about art heroes, how you mentioned that you have an art hero. Who are yours? Who are the artists that you look up to or who inspire you?
One of the artists I look up to currently, that's alive, Banksy is one of them. But another one is this artist named John Sabra, who is a painting professor from University of Ohio. And he does very socially conscious work. What's interesting about his work is that he found a problem in his community, which is the toxic water coming out from drainage mines or whatever, and turned it into clean water by taking the acid out of the water and turning that into painting pigments. So he was able to work with, I think, Winsor Newton, and they are actually releasing a series of his paint tubes that's straight from the mines of these acid drainage sites. It was really amazing. So to really being creative about thinking about how we as artists can contribute in ways more than just creating, pretty compositions. So that is something that I really can appreciate about what he does.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we're at about an hour, and I want to, Jave, thank you for taking the time. Thanks for showing us your work. It's great to see the evolution over the past decade of work, and I want to thank SU Art for letting me chime in here, and I hope everybody stays safe, stays healthy, and good luck with fall 2020.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You
thank you, Jave, and thank you, Andrew, for hosting and moderating.
Yeah, thank you guys. It was great.
Talk to you soon.
All right, bye.